aid, correct?
We may not.
We may not. We also may not have information from the federal government.
We will not.
We will not from them. And even if we knew that, it could change at any minute. So in this scenario, just so everyone's clear, right, if we approve this budget on May 16th, and the voters approve it, when I say we, I mean the voters approve this budget, and then 2 weeks later, the state, reduces our aid, or 3 months later, the feds cut in half our funding. What happens to the taxpayers? I just want everyone to understand.
The state will not reduce the aid that we now know of.
Okay.
The feds could affect it, but it's unlikely there would be any effect for the coming year. We are also hopeful that our aid will be, even though there's been a 60-day extension, that we will still know those numbers. But to your point, we would have to, if something were reduced or something changed, we would have to use existing fund balance, or we would have to cut.
Right. And like you said, some of those balances are line items that you can only use for certain things, and some of them are not restricted.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And then I guess my other concern, which is a multi-year concern, is as I look through the draft version, and I'll look through this again, this administration has done a remarkable job, both before and after I've been on the board, of finding efficiencies, of making efficiencies in the administration, of making efficiencies with union members, of making physical efficiencies, right, converting from oil to gas. There's all sorts of things that we've been doing to cut costs, and they've worked very well, and the administration deserves all the credit for that. It's really impressive. My concern to what Trustees Moore and what Superintendent Hamilton have already mentioned, we can't do that forever. There are only so many times you can convert from oil to gas, and only so many retirement packages you can put together, and only so many schools you can rearrange, or in this case, might even be opening one, right? Correct. So I applaud the past. I applaud the present, which is very impressive, what I did review and what we'll continue to, I'm sure, talk about. But to reiterate what others have said, in the next year or the year after or 5 years from now, we don't know what the state's going to provide. We don't know what the feds are going to provide. We don't know a lot of things. And the miracles that have been accomplished by this administration are miraculous.
Thank you.
Meaning they might not continue for 20 more years to continue. That's my point.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
What I was going to say, thank you, Micah, because I echo those sentiments, so I don't need to restate them. But to this board, I would like us to consider, after this particular year, how we continuously move forward with this administration, with the superintendent, understanding that there are a lot of uncertainties moving forward. And everything that this committee has done has taken that into consideration. Looking at this budget line by line, looking at the percentages of increases and where we can cut those percentages back, ensuring that our tax increase wasn't over a certain percentage, et cetera, moving forward. But what we have to do is understand that there are still a lot of areas in our budget, according to this committee, that we recognize that we should always keep our eyes on, and how we can reduce those costs. For instance, in the special education department, we spend over $10 million in sending children out of district just in BOCES. That's not even private school settings that we send them out, but in particular BOCES. So how can we reinvigorate that area, which the superintendent talked about already in the previous presentations? How can we look at those areas and say, okay, how can we begin to bring some of these students back, and we can provide those services here to the district while ensuring that those students get everything that they need. It's a huge area that really needs to be visited, and see that how this district can continue to transform, because moving forward, we really don't know at this present moment what's going to take place at the federal level. It's a huge conversation, it's a huge debate, and we should take it very seriously from a physical standpoint to ensure that moving forward, that what we've put in place is sustainable. We have to ensure that what we're opening, whether it be the arts program, whether it be the STEM school, whether it be sports programs, the intramural sports program, that is sustainable moving forward. And as we noted to this year, we thought that it was possible and capable of coming in at 0, but as stated, we don't know what's going to happen May 31st. That's just a fact of the matter. We don't know what's going to happen May 31st, but due to the job that Ken Silver has already done, due to the recommendations from this committee, we believe that this budget at this present moment is solid. It's been looked at through our committee members, Rick Powers and Thomas Keller, as well as Darcy Miller and myself, and we believe that this is a strong budget that represents our vision, represents our goals that we put in place, but we still have those large areas that we need to consider moving forward. And being that this is an election, well, it's always an election year for our board, isn't it? It's always an election year for our board, regardless of who's at these seats. It's important that we pay keen attention to what's being done with this budget, because at the end of the day, these numbers represent students.
Absolutely.
One of the things I'd like to mention is that the Budget Committee conversations have been extremely productive in that we have identified certain areas where we can be really forward-looking and say, where do we want to be in 3 or 4 years relative to some of the special programs, specifically things that Ms. Gayon is doing with her autism program. And we really feel that if we set some benchmarks, some specific goals for where we want to be in 3 years in some of these areas that are very high cost, and perhaps we really can be able to bring some of these students back, we'll be able to really be working towards a goal that could help mitigate some of the cuts that we could get, from the National Endowment for the Arts or the feds or what have you. So I think we've identified some really interesting initiatives that are measurable and also projectable based on some of the work that's already been done. So our plan is to really, the minute this budget's put to bed, is to start working on these longer-term projects that will put the district in a more sustainable position regardless of outside forces. And I think that was a really positive thing that came out of the committee meetings this year.
That's great. Well, another thing in response to Trustee McDowell's statement regarding the budget moving forward, we have to, again, look outside of the district itself in terms of okay, what cuts may we have to make and how should we proceed? Because the city has a lot to do, and I will say it again, in terms of how much money we get. So if they keep giving out tax breaks and tax pilots and reducing our income, then it forces us to now look deeper and make cuts to education, to make cuts to programs, music, sports, whatever. So it's everyone's duty out there to make sure that the city is not just giving away our tax base, because what's going to be left is more taxes for those of us who remain here, and we will not be able to educate all of the children that plan to come with these new developments. So that is very important. As I sit here and I listen to this, we have an onslaught of developments in the works. We have tons of students coming in, and meanwhile, we're fighting for dollars on the federal level, the state level, and then where are we going to find it? Oh, increased taxes, again, on the citizens. And a lot of the citizens, of course, have, again, fixed incomes, kids in private school, they work 2 or 3 jobs just to even make their mortgage payments, and meanwhile, the homes, a lot of them here in Mount Vernon suffer from need of repair because they simply don't have the money. So I would task this this community to really go out there and pay attention to what's happening at the city level, the mayor's level, the executive branch, and the legislative branch over at City Council. That's where the big fight is, because every time they give away these pilots, we lose money. In regards to special education, that's a challenge. We know that in a lot of cases, we simply don't have the resources here in the district to properly educate certain kids with in the special education cohort. So as we try to improve our services, obviously that takes money, it takes staff, it takes experienced faculty, but you have a lot of parents who their number one priority, and rightfully so, are their children. So we have to tread lightly when it comes to special education and make sure that the first goal is not necessarily the money, but making sure that each child truly gets what they need.
Absolutely.
All right?
Could I just add to your comment about
Sure.
looking outside. I think that, while I hear you stressing about the pilots, I think another argument to be made is how education is funded. And having that dialogue and that discussion, understand that the current formula that's used and how we fund education through tax levying, a community like Mount Vernon is always on the back end. It's important that we recognize that when we fund education through the levying of taxes, that it's unsustainable that way, especially in a community like Mount Vernon, where the taxes, for instance, the taxes in Scarsdale, the taxes in Bronxville are double what the taxes here in Mount Vernon are. And when a community can't sustain that tax levy, what do? Because that's pretty much at the breaking point where we are. So that conversation, that wider conversation is not only, as you have spearheaded that piloting dialogue, but I think that another dialogue that should be started is how education is funded. And that goes all the way up to the legislature, and we should be referring people to talk to the assemblyman, to talk to the state representative about changing the funding and that formula that they particularly use for education. Because if we did that, it will put all the districts on an equal level and make it an even playing field for everyone if we change that formula.
So what are you suggesting? Flat tax?
I'm suggesting that we go to the state and talk about changing the formula. as it
Right, but you have an
relates to
opinion,
levying
you have a
tax.
suggestion?
That's where I am at the present moment.
Looking for one, you're saying?
Excuse me?
You're looking for an idea? Is that what you're saying?
Looking for an idea?
Yeah.
No, that we need to change the formula.
Right, so what do you suggest? I mean, I'm just, I'm,
Well,
you're-
flat tax is on the table.
okay,
It's on the table, but you have to consider other options that may be available to us.
such as?
Where with all the options